the OPP, and the
We're back.
RCMP.
And we're back.
And just generally, what function did you perform in liaising with those police forces?
Well, there was a tremendous amount of information coming in to me on any given day. And so what I viewed my primary function, what I spent the majority of my time doing, was triaging information that could have been any type of threat to public safety, anything that I felt had any kind of credibility or something that was beyond my scope to verify. I would forward that to the police, all of the different police liaisons I was connecting with.
And I understand you were working out of the Swiss Hotel where there was an operation and logistical support center?
That's correct.
And you formed an incident command using that model?
Yeah, that's correct. So there was a number of us volunteers that had worked in first responder type jobs.
Welcome back.
You know, police, paramedic, a lot of firefighters from outside of the city of Ottawa. And what we did was we tried to establish an incident command system, like a network and a model, an incident command model, so that it was easily identifiable who was responsible for what, so that it would make our communication more efficient and just to overall streamline our day-to-day operations.
And one of the other individuals working with you was Vincent Gearsis. Have I got that right?
Yes, Vincent, he came to the Swiss Hotel very early on and we connected. And what eventually happened, my apologies, he came to the Swiss. He was there for the first weekend, maybe, not a very long period of time. He returned home and then he came back to Ottawa, at which time when he asked me what he could do, I asked him if he could go over to the ARC Hotel and support them.
Thank you. And then who was the first police person that you communicated with?
Constable Isabel Sear Pidcock of the Ottawa Police Service.
And did you call her or did she call you?
I called her on the 26th.
And could you tell us about that conversation?
Yeah, I contacted her. I gave a brief description of who I was and what I was going to be doing in support of the convoy. Mr. Guerra had advised me that he had already been in communication with her and that we were expecting a map package from the Ottawa City Police as to where the trucks were supposed to enter into the city and where they were supposed to park and stage.
And did she tell you anything else, let's say, about emergency vehicle lanes?
We may have discussed that on the phone call, but it was definitely, there was specific instructions delivered in the map package that she did end up sending me on the 27th of January.
And so could you put up, please, HRF 00001313?
I'm trying so hard to stay here.
If you could go to the next page, please. Is this the map package she sent you?
Yes, I believe so.
And we see it says under Ottawa Truck Convoy, take direction from police whenever applicable, leave open space for emergency vehicle access at all times, no closed trailers permitted on Wellington near Parliament Hill. all staging areas must be kept an adjacent emergency access lane and emergency routes that are listed there, no convoy access at any time. Correct?
And those were kept open.
And did you communicate those instructions to anyone?
Yes, I emailed this map package to Tamara Leach with the understanding that they would be receiving a briefing in Arnprior the night before entering the city.
And how did you know to email them to Ms. Leach?
Well, Ms. Leach had contacted me prior to the convoy arriving in Ottawa, not in regards to this, but for support with monitoring and responding to social media, which I said that I agreed that the Mounties for Freedom could help her with. And so I forwarded her contact information off to, we had a social media committee at the time. And then, so I was already aware that she was, like, I would describe her as the face of the convoy. And so that's who I communicated the map package to.
Thank you. And if you can just scroll to the next page, please. This is one of the maps. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 maps, if you can scroll up. And again, what were those maps of? What was that telling you?
These are the entrance routes for the various convoys that were approaching from different directions, and where they would be directed to enter the city and where to park.
And if we
Literally-
go to the next page,
Literally showed them, the
please.
police document literally
This
showing them
is,
exactly where to park.
From Constable Sarah Piddock, and it says routes to staging areas.
This is
And
hilarious.
What did you understand that to mean?
Exactly what it says.
And so you knew that you understood there would be certain staging areas?
I did.
And if you can go to the last page, or sorry, the next page over. Sorry, there. There are certain instructions there, including no parking on Elgin Street from Wellington to Highway 417, and so forth. And all of that, you say you passed on to Ms. Leach?
Yes.
What police force was Constable Sear with?
Ottawa Police Service.
And where were you when the convoy started to arrive?
I was in the Swiss Hotel.
Now, we've heard evidence that from time to time, some emergency lanes were blocked, either on a short-term basis or, for example, on Kent Street, on a long-term basis. What observations did you make about emergency lanes?
I did see when I would do let's refer to it as a perimeter walk, that the only place that I ever observed that the emergency lanes were blocked was for roughly, I would estimate 2, maybe 3 blocks north and south on Kent Street.
And that was it?
That's all I recall.
Okay, and then
I apologize. Perhaps at Rideau and Sussex as well.
okay, we'll come to Rideau and Sussex. If you can turn up, please, Mr. Clerk, pb.nsc.can.40 1367. And go. And if you can go to page 10, please. A little further up. Sorry, can we try page 11? Oh, no, excuse me for one second. Let me just ask you the question. Did you have a further conversation with members of police forces on January 28th?
As referenced in this document?
Yes, let me just turn it up for you. It's excuse me one moment. All right, it's page 11 at the bottom. You see, it refers to you, that you're organizing the volunteer security for the group warroomcanada.net. What was that?
That was the initial website domain that Mr. Guerra was operating Adopt a Trucker through.
And it says on Friday, January 28, 2022, you reached out to points of contact within the RCMP, OPP, and the NCRCC seeking information obtained via open source on the demonstration. Do you remember that?
Yes, I don't recall reaching out to the OPP that early. I could be mistaken, but I definitely reached out to Ottawa Police Service, PPS, and the RCMP. And when it references the NCRCC, that's a command center that was at my old building of work.
Yes.
And so the specific person I reached out to from the RCMP, I believed to be working out of that location.
And do you remember who that was?
Constable Chris Angel.
And do you remember who you reached out to in the PPS?
Constable Emily Gosselin.
And did you reach out again to Constable Cyr Pigot?
Yes, I believe so. And perhaps by that time, I already had learned of Constable Paul Askin from the Ottawa Police Service as well.
Okay, and if we go back to the document, it says in his email, Bulford noted the single largest concern of everyone involved is that outside influences will attempt to instigate an action that will damage the credibility of the official convoy group and supporters. Why was that your main concern?
Well, I've worked many of these large events in the NCR over my career, and consistently the biggest concern from a protective policing standpoint was always the potential for a lone wolf or a small group when you have a large crowd of people coming together, like a similar event like a Canada Day or a Remembrance Day. That was one of our primary function from my old unit, was to be in positions where we could observe anything of a suspicious nature that could potentially become a lone actor or small group attack.
And I understand that you reached out to, on January 29th, to Sergeant Front of the OPS. Do you recall that?
Sergeant Frost?
I believe it was Front, or is the name Cross?
The OPS, Ottawa Police Sergeant,
Yes.
that was a man by the name of Sergeant Pat Frost.
Frost, I'm sorry, it was a typo. And what did you discuss with him?
So that would have been very early in the morning. I received a call from some of the truckers down at the intersection of Booth and Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway. They were frustrated that they had been blocked from continuing further up onto Wellington, like up towards the Supreme Court. And so I went down just to see what would be possible. And while I was there, I ended up speaking with two of the young officers. One of the officers was a younger man. And I spoke to those officers asking if it would be possible to have some of the trucks that were extended along Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway to condense closer to I would call it the main body of the convoy parked on Wellington at Parliament. And because there was a large gap, if I recall correctly, there was a large gap kind of around the Supreme Court of Canada all the way down the hillside of Wellington and then extending west
Yes.
to the Booth and SJAM. And so those officers got me into contact with Sergeant Pat Frost. And so I met with him at the Ottawa Police Headquarters, and we drove around downtown Ottawa together because he relayed to me that he had managed a large tractor protest in the city of Ottawa before. And so we were touring around the downtown core trying to determine what potential locations trucks could be brought in closer to Parliament. And establishing what was a hard no-go, like such as primary bus routes and emergency lanes.
And what were your general observations of the protest during the first weekend?
Well, I didn't get out of the Swiss hotel very much those first initial days, but when I finally did, it was the largest event I've ever observed in downtown Ottawa in my time here.
And what about the conduct of the participants?
Well, I'd say it was a very festive atmosphere. People were very emotional, hugs all over the place. There was the stage, the crane stage truck had already been established up at the intersection of Metcalfe and Wellington by the time I got out for the very first time to go actually see it for myself. And so that's where I went, and it was incredible. The crowd was humongous, and people, if I recall correctly, the first time I got out was to actually go make a speech on the stage truck. And it was a very overwhelming emotional experience because I felt that there was a sense of hope that Canada wouldn't go to a very dark place.
And what was your speech about, just very generally?
Well, I know that I included some of those remarks in my speech, that prior to that convoy, I was ready to leave the country. My wife and I had discussed that at length, moving somewhere where we would be, treated as an equal citizen, and especially for the future of our children. And that seeing the convoy and the rallying of support behind it all across Canada restored my faith in Canadians, that they weren't just going to let Canada degenerate further.
Did you talk about security issues or behavioral issues?
I did. I gave a thank you to the first responders, and I even kind of tipped my hat slightly to some of my old colleagues that were up on the roof of the Parliament buildings doing Overwatch, saying that I know a lot of these people, they're good people, and they're here to protect us too. There was a great deal of mistrust of the police. And I reminded everyone, or advocated for everyone, to remain lawful, peaceful and lawful at all times so that the government and the media could not label us with similar derogatory terms that they already had.
And if we could go put back up, please, HRF 401553. And if you can just scroll through that to the date February 1. So if you can stop it just there. I take it you took daily notes of everything that you were doing?
Yeah, I tried to document as much as I could.
And that's all set out in your statement?
Yes.
And so, for example, you were dealing with issues like if you identified on February 1st, or you received a call about an aggressive unidentified male at Wellington and Metcalf, and you reported that to the police, correct? In the first paragraph there?
Yeah, I don't recall if I called the police. I think people that were present at the stage truck at the time called the police.
And if you just keep scrolling, please, you'll see there's a number of events or issues that you dealt with on February 1st and then into February 2nd. And then if we come to February 3rd, could you put up, please, HRF 401287? This is a letter from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms to the mayor. It refers on page 2 to a press conference that you gave on February 3.
That's correct.
And so in the second paragraph there, you indicate that you'd like to put people's minds at ease. The public is watching people that have concerns over what they're seeing in regards to the heavy police presence. What was your objective there?
Just to bring down the overall anxiety level of the protesters. I mean, in my mind, Ottawa residents have seen that type of police presence probably on a regular basis at large scale events. But a lot of these people that traveled to Ottawa have likely never been here before and likely never participated in an event of this magnitude. So I just wanted everyone to understand that when you have a massive crowd such as this come to the National Capital Region for a large event, it's normal to have multiple police agencies involved. It's normal to have specialized units moving around in more tactical looking clothing. And it's normal to have snipers on rooftops because that was something that a lot of people were really panicked about. They were nervous about the presence of snipers being on the roof. And that being my old job, I was able to speak to people and keep them calm. Be like, it's totally normal. Don't panic. That's what happens here all the time.
And if you can go put up, please, HRF 401289. And it's page 11 of the document, I believe. Sorry. Can you just scroll back a bit? No, more. I scroll up then, sorry about that. No, the other way, please. Yeah, keep going, please. More. This, keep going, please. This is an affidavit that you swore in connection with the proceedings, the class action commenced by Zexi Lee.
Yes, that's correct.
And you talk about at paragraph 7 and 8, if you can scroll there, about a complaint from an Ottawa resident about honking through the night.
Yes, that's correct.
And you say you told him that quiet hours from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. had been put in place. What was your understanding of that? Who put that into place?
My understanding is that the truck captains had already put that into place, maybe even the day before, if not that day, the day before. That's what was communicated to myself. And this was the one and only complaint I ever received about it.
And what was your understanding moving through the period of time that the convoy was in Ottawa? Did that change?
Well, there was the injunction came into place as well, which definitely impacted the horn honking. And I would say, in my opinion, it reduced it even further.
And can we go to paragraph 9 of your affidavit? You say there, my primary concern is individuals or groups with potential to deliberately instigate conflict with the Freedom Convoy movement and to discredit the Freedom Convoy. Can you say why that was your concern?
Well, that would go back partially to my concern about a lone wolf or small cell that could potentially try and leverage the large crowd for their own agenda. But I also had concerns because I've done overwatch at a number of protests and counter protests in Ottawa, and I've seen with my own eyes how aggressive groups related to the Antifa movement can be when they are much larger in numbers than the group that they're counter protesting against, and how aggressive they can be overrunning the police line as well.
So when you were referring to instigators, who were you referring to?
Well, people who would deliberately try to initiate a violent interaction with a Freedom Convoy protester, or maybe even someone who would try to infiltrate the crowd with a racist type flag to try and bring discredit to the Freedom Convoy protest.
And do you recall, and I believe the date was February 8, having a conversation with Constable Wierzbicki about your concern and displeasure with the psychological operation being waged on convoy participants?
Yes, I do.
And what was that about?
So in the initial, I would say close to initial 2 weeks, I thought that Chief Slowly was pretty fair in his remarks regarding the convoy, understanding his position as the chief of police of the city of Ottawa. But I thought that he was pretty unbiased. And then after I think it was a council meeting or a police services board meeting, there was a lot of rhetoric regarding the Freedom Convoy protesters' allegations of being extremists, insurrectionists. I believe even the term domestic terrorism may have been thrown around. And I noticed at that time, it also coincided with a lot of that same rhetoric from the legacy media. And we'd already heard and seen the Prime Minister using similar language. And so I felt that was definitely heightening the anxiety of the overall crowd. The fear that they were going to be labeled such and dealt with as such by law enforcement because they were under so much pressure from the different levels of government. And there was also, I believe that was right around the same time that there was also, they were being denied access to service some of the portable toilets. So, I mean, you're denying people their basic sanitation needs. And there was also information beginning to circulate about the involvement of CAS, or Children's Aid Society, I believe is what that stands for. And that to me was a clear red flag to me that if you are deliberately trying to provoke people to take action, if you make them believe that you're going to take their kids away, that's going to elicit a very strong emotional response. And I believe that was deliberately done in order to bully the Freedom Convoy protesters.
And we can put up, please, document HRF 50568. Is this the type of daily security briefing that you would prepare on a day-to-day basis?
I believe there was a mistake. I did not prepare these daily security briefings, like a document.
Yes.
That was another individual. But I mean, these are some of my, some of the actions that I took place in and the conversations that I took place in.
And who is Constable Wierzbicki?
He is an OPP liaison officer.
And in this document, you refer to under February 4 in the first paragraph to an incident at Confederation Park. And then you refer to an incident involving the new Queen of Canada. And next
boy.
paragraph down, you were asked about Pat King's involvement in the convoy. And you indicated you had limited knowledge and almost zero contact with him. And if you can scroll further down, please. Next page. There is no next page. Did you also at one time speak to Constable Wierzbicki about a memorandum of understanding that was circulating?
I don't recall speaking to Constable Wierzbicki about that, no.
Did you know about the memorandum of understanding?
Yes, I had heard about it, and I think I may have seen it circulating online ahead of the convoy. The first time I ever actually read it was just last week.
There's a silly document.
And you mentioned the intersection at Rideau and Sussex. Did you have occasion to go to Rideau and Sussex?
Yes, I walked through that intersection multiple times daily, well, at least probably twice a day, when I would go out for a foot patrol and when I would come back.
And what were your observations?
Well, they were primarily made up of Quebecois truckers, but then there was also, like other witnesses have testified, there was also like a Polish or Eastern European contingent. And I actually encountered a a Cuban Canadian who spoke to me at length about how he felt strongly about being there to support the convoy because he had lived through communism and that Canadians could not give up their freedoms.
And were you there at any time when there was attempts to move vehicles from Rideau and Sussex?
No, I was not.
And what was your impression of the way people were behaving at the intersection?
Well, on weekends, they would have a stage and music, and they would have like a nightly dance party on definitely on the Friday and the Saturday night, typically, is what I recall.
And what about during the week? Do you recall?
There was a lot of different food tents and barbecues. People were cooking and preparing food in clumps of people.
Now, we heard evidence from Keith Wilson. You know Mr. Wilson?
Yes, I do.
That there were leaks in either the OPS, OPP, or both because the convoy organizers were aware of police operations before they happened. Did you know about that?
I never had any active duty officers leaking me any sensitive information. I did have a number of police officers, former police officers, former military, that were helping me with some of the different security tasks. And there was, I'm not exactly certain of the number, but there was officers that were on leave for various reasons, whether it would be the mandates or their own personal reasons. I didn't ask, it wasn't my business, that were also helping with some of the security tasks that I was coordinating.
Okay. And if I can move to a different subject, did you continue to have contact with the PLT of the police forces over the entire period?
In general, yes. There might have been the odd day where there was no communication. I know communication with the Ottawa Police Service liaison teams I recall it reducing near the end, like especially after the Emergencies Act had been invoked. But from my recollection, the OPP was fairly regularly engaged.
And did you, concerning the OPS, did you have a view on how effective they were being?
Well, I think they were overwhelmed by the size of the convoy. I think that I actually had the young officer that I spoke to that early in the convoy down at Booth and Sir John A. Macdonald. He actually said to me, I can't believe the size of this. Something to this effect. I can't believe the size of this. We're totally unprepared for something this size. And I kind of laughed and I said, well, you guys have to stop listening to the CBC for intelligence. And that was kind of the end of that interaction. But because if you had been paying attention to open source, like any kind of social media, it was obvious that this was a huge event that was about to land in Ottawa. But coming back to how effective they were, I have no complaints about dealing with them, but I don't think it was ever really, I never really felt as though there was any kind of a negotiation taking place. It was just my means to communicate with the police, because we would try and get simple returns from the police liaisons, like something as simple as like, could we possibly get access to this location so we could drop some portable toilets? And we were getting shut down almost all the time. The only time I ever remember having any success with that was after I had expressed my displeasure about the psychological operation that was being conducted when I had that discussion with OPP Where's Becky.
And at one point, did you come to learn that Chief Slowly had asked for 1,800 police officers?
Yes, I did.
And what was your reaction to that?
Well, I anticipated that at the very least he was asking for a large number because this could be a sustained event and members would obviously need to be cycled out for sustainment. And likely that they were preparing for a mass mobilization.
And did you do anything as a result of hearing that information?
I mean, we had discussions about it. It didn't change what my role was. My task was to just continue trying to keep things as safe as possible.
And were you aware of negotiations that were taking place between the leaders in the convoy and the mayor?
I was made aware of that after the fact.
Okay. And in terms of, did you have any communication with anyone who was involved in the Ambassador Bridge protest?
No, I did not. I believe we've already seen an email that was forwarded to me by Miss Leach
Yes.
during her testimony, and that was the only time I'd ever seen anything from Windsor, and that I didn't even open that until well after the Ottawa convoy had been dismantled.
And what about Coots,
No, sir.
Emerson, Surrey?
None.
Now, at what point do you recall learning that the Emergencies Act was to be invoked?
I believe the day that it was officially announced by the federal government.
Did you hear anything about it prior to that date?
I think there was discussions, people wondering if it would be, and my thought process was that, well, I would not be surprised if it was, because the city had declared a state of emergency, the province had declared one. To me, it would not surprise me in the least if the next logical step was the federal government.
And do you recall, subsequent to the invocation on February 16, holding a press conference?
Yes, I do.
And that was with Mr. Gerses and Mr. Cornell?
That's correct.
And who is Mr. Cornell?
He's one of the members of the steering committee for the group Veterans for Freedom. He's a combat veteran.
And if I can just read you what I understand you said at that press conference, the emergency order clearly states that the protest is allowed to continue if the protest is peaceful. The government is trying to order the police to use force against peaceful protesters. We call on our fellow Canadians to come to Ottawa to exercise their legal right to assembly and protest. The more Canadians that come to Ottawa, the harder it will be for the police to carry out the government's illegal order. Is that something you said?
That's correct.
And did you receive advice as to your interpretation of the emergency order?
Yes. We'd received a briefing from the legal team that, based on, I believe it's Justice McLean's ruling, that as long as people did not come to Ottawa to engage in violence, disrupt trade, or block critical infrastructure, we still fell within the confines of a lawful protest.
And did somebody request that you give this press conference, or did you do it on your own initiative?
Well, I was working with the media relations people from early on. I think like you mentioned, that my first press conference that I attended was on February 3rd. And so I did a number of press conference events during my time with the convoy.
And at this point, isn't it fair to say that you believe that enforcement action could come at any time?
Perhaps I was naively hoping that my brothers and sisters in law enforcement would see the truth on the ground as opposed to what the government and the media was saying, and that they would take a historic opportunity to stand up for our Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
And did you think about, or was it a concern to you that you were encouraging people to come into Ottawa where that sort of law enforcement activity might well take place?
No, because at that time, like I said, I still had faith that frontline members would do the right thing.
Now, my understanding is that on February 18, your wife advised you that you were going to be arrested.
Yes, that's correct. She advised me that she had received a text message from one of our neighbors that the news was reporting that the police were looking for me to arrest me.
And if we turn to the document PB NSC CAN 408924. The second page of the document. This is an RCMP document, and if you look at the bottom of the page, you'll see information collected. Freedom Convoy organizers held a press conference at 13:30 hours. Participants included, and that's blanked out, spoke to the same theme. And you see what it says there about Canadians still being allowed to come to Ottawa with their children to engage in peaceful, lawful protest. Is that what you said at your press conference?
Yeah, I believe that's accurate.
And you'll see the last paragraph there. All three individuals have contravened to Section 5 of the Emergency Measures Regulations by inviting a person to participate in an assembly that may reasonably be expected to lead to a breach of the peace. Now, I can come back. Were you arrested on February 18?
Yes, I was.
And can you briefly tell the commissioner about that?
Well, after the press conference, and my wife showed me the text message from our neighbor, I left the Lord Elgin Hotel. I walked down to Rideau and Sussex, where I knew that the police action had already begun. Initially, I encountered the Sûreté de Québec. No one would respond to me. So then I realized that there was RCMP, a line of RCMP officers over closer to the Senate, or the old train station. And so I walked over to them. I approached the line. I presented myself, and I said, something to the effect of, I hear that you're looking for me to arrest me. Is that true? And then I was arrested for mischief.
And were you ultimately charged?
No, I was not.
Were your bank accounts frozen?
Yes, they were.
Can you tell the commissioner about that, please?
To my recollection, we realized that our bank accounts were frozen. So 2 different banks and a primary credit card. I realized, how I recall it going was that accessing online banking with our primary bank, and it was just like a blank dash where the account balance would normally be. And then I believe my wife confirmed with the other bank, attempted to use the credit card, and it was declined. and my wife spoke to a banking professional, a friend of ours, to ask if with our accounts frozen, would our mortgage payments and automatic withdrawals still be paid? And we were advised that it would not be. And so I would say roughly a period of 5 to 6 days, we were completely dependent on what cash we had.
And after that, how long were your accounts frozen?
I believe my accounts were unfrozen on the Tuesday,
This is
the
a lot. I'm sorry.
22nd or the 23rd of February, when after the Emergencies Act had been revoked.
So they were frozen for how many days?
I believe I realized they were frozen on the 17th. And then I think that was the Thursday. I didn't receive any kind of notification about it until I think one bank called me and left a voicemail message on the Saturday. And then it was unfrozen after the Emergencies Act had been revoked.
And were you able to meet your day-to-day expenses during that period?
Well, fortunately, we didn't have a whole pile of expenses that we had to incur during those days, but we had some help from some family.
Okay, thank you, sir. Those are my questions.
If I may add one thing about the accounts being frozen, I was never notified by the police that my accounts were frozen, contrary to what was said to Parliament by the RCMP when they testified in committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have the Ottawa Police Service, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bulford. My name is David Mijakovsky. I'm a lawyer for the Ottawa Police Service.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. You talked about your interactions with the PLT, and I gather from reviewing your statement, you had many interactions with the PLT. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And they were very helpful?
I think they desired to be, yes.
And you had the sense that they wished they had more ability to negotiate?
Yes, I would say that's accurate. I do recall, you know, when there was attempts to negotiate, occasionally receiving the reply that that wasn't their decision to make.
Right. In your statement you prepared, you have a statement that says Canada Freedom Rights Movement, a Daniel Joseph Bulford statement. That's a statement that was prepared for you by the Justice Centre's lawyers?
No, sir, I prepared that myself.
And you put that logo on top, or that name on top, Canada Freedom Rights Movement?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you suggest that everyone else do that as well?
No, I did not.
Okay. In that report, you indicate a number of potentially criminal actions involving non-convoy members that you reported to the OPS. And so I see things in that report about bikers, about the new Queen of Canada, false claims that bricks had been ordered in your name, potential instigation, concerns about Canada unity, vandalism of trucks, social media posts made by Mr. Lacasse, a shortage, a sabotage of transport trucks, bikers, and bomb threats, right? Those are all things that you referenced.
That's correct.
And you're a strong supporter, I take it, of law and order.
My dad was a police officer for 38 years. Both of my older brothers were police officers. Obviously, I was. And there's only one of us remaining, but my hometown in Alberta referred to us as the Byzantine Blue Bloods.
And I know from the Ottawa Police Service institutional report that I won't turn up in order to save time, that during the period of the convoy, there were a number of criminal charges laid. In fact,
All right. So if you've enjoyed the coverage this week, maybe today's been a little lackluster. I'm barely alive here. I'd really appreciate it if you considered sending a coffee over. I need more coffee than there is in the world, and that's where you can go for that. So, thank you.
where you brought any of those
It's in the
criminal
it's in the
offenses
description as
to
well.
the attention of the Ottawa Police.
Can you refresh me on the dates that you're referring to?
The dates? Yes. Your statement, I'm not sure when your statement was prepared, but the evidence that we have in the record is that during the period of the Freedom Convoy, so from January 28th to a date in March, there were a total of 533 criminal charges.
Okay.
Sorry,
There was
I
more
can't
than
remember if
that.
that's laid or people arrested. And so I didn't see anywhere in your statement where you brought information about that criminal activity
Sir?
to the attention of the Ottawa Police.
I have an
Okay, just
objection.
hold on one. Yes?
My friend is misstating the evidence to the witness, and I object to it. On that basis, the evidence is that the vast majority of charges were laid after the fact, and that actually, at least based on the one document and evidence, criminal charges that existed at the time before the invocation were only about 19 of charges laid. So with respect to my friend stating in the OPS document, and I can advise the commission that after I looked at what they had put together, I asked for disclosure from them with respect to when these charges were laid, and they've decided not to provide that, and they're using a jumbled up statistic. So in my submission, sir, my friend's going to ask the witness about why he didn't include OPS information in his statement that isn't clear. I think he needs to actually put the actual evidence that is before this tribunal before him, and not jumble it up into a fact that these are 500 some odd charges that may or may not have been laid during the time period that he was here, sir.
Okay, well, maybe you can just ask the
I
question
think
without reference.
I think the question was fair, and my friends now used a couple minutes of my time, but there were a lot of charges during the period of the Freedom Convoy. We know that. And I don't see anywhere in your statement where you reference informing the Ottawa Police of the situations leading to those criminal charges.
Well, I often reported to the Ottawa Police, the various police agencies, anything that came to my attention that I believed to be criminal or a public safety concern. And I believe that the majority of those arrests and charges happened during the dismantle operation of the protest.
They did, Danny.
A significant chunk of which I was in custody.
You were in custody as of what date, sir?
February 18th.
Well, the record will speak for itself.
Sure, I'll
so
play the record right now.
In your statement,
I have it.
in paragraph 80 of your
Somewhere.
statement, you say you did everything to cooperate with the police and to maintain public peace and police safety. Is that correct or is that incorrect?
Well, it was closer
That's
than I
correct.
thought to the number.
Okay. And so I also note that in the institutional report of the Ottawa Police, that the communication center received many emergency calls from businesses to have protesters removed because they weren't wearing a mask, to deal with complaints about being harassed while walking on the street with masks, to complaints of being sexually harassed and threatened. I see as well that questions were asked about OPS's enforcement plans. I see as well that there were noise
he's really been
complaints that
upset
were
all day
received and
because of those
requests
videos
for
from earlier.
charges against the protesters. And I don't
Okay,
see
so-
anywhere, sir, in your statement where you reference any of those things.
Well, sir, that's not my job to handle the call volume that the Ottawa Police receives. And there's a lot of allegations that I've heard during testimony at this inquiry that I have no knowledge or have not seen any real evidence of. I'm not suggesting that it's not possible, but people were
Absolutely.
not calling me to report criminal offenses to the police.
Okay. You've heard the evidence of Councillors McKenney and Fleury,
Yes,
and you heard about what their constituents had to put up with, correct?
What they
You
said.
heard that evidence? I'm
Hold
just
on.
asking you that question.
yes, I heard their evidence.
And so either, did you believe what Councillor McKenney and Fleury said?
This is what Councillor McKenney said.
Or did you think the issues they were raising were trivial?
Putting words in his mouth.
I wouldn't characterize what they were saying as trivial, but again, I've come to the point where I'm not going to believe anything until I see actual evidence of it.
You told
It's
me
on this-
about
it's
you
on the screen, guys. It's
clearly
on the screen
respect
here.
law and order. I take it you have a lot of respect for the Canadian court system. Correct?
I sincerely hope it's still functioning the way it is intended. Yes,
It's important that decisions of the court be respected.
yes,
And one of the decisions was that the convoy had negatively impacted residents, and the convoy protesters were breaching bylaws. You were aware of that?
could you specify the bylaws?
Were you aware of that, sir?
Well, again, sir, it's not my profession to enforce bylaws in the city of Ottawa.
Okay. And as a police officer, you understand that disclosing confidential information is an offense?
What type of confidential information are you referring to?
Confidential information. It's an offense under the Police Services Act, and it's also an offense under the Code of Conduct for the RCMP, correct?
That's correct. You mean
Um,
like as it relates to information I learned during my time as a police officer?
No, I'm just asking you the question generally, that the disclosure of confidential information is an offense, correct? While if a serving police officer discloses information, that is an offense, correct?
Like if I was to disclose something confidential as an active serving police officer, that would be an offense under the RCMP Code of Conduct?
Right,
I would agree with that, yes.
right. And same thing would apply to a municipal police officer who discloses information they had as a police officer.
I'm not entirely certain. I would assume you're probably accurate, but I didn't fall under the Police Services Act.
Okay, sure. It would be breach of confidence if that's of assistance. But it can also potentially be a criminal offense as well, correct? Breach of trust.
Yeah, probably.
And being a person who supports law and order, you would not condone that kind of
Oh, he's
thing,
so
would
angry.
You,
He's
you wouldn't
so-
want
you would
police
not condone
officers
that, would
to
you?
be breaching their oaths and providing confidential information to members of the convoy, would you?
No.
And so Mr. Wilson, in his witness statement, talks about people working at the Swiss Hotel. That was where you were?
That's correct.
And so he said there were former law enforcement officers, they had radios, maps. Many of these ex-service personnel were connected and brought in intel. Wilson is unaware of the sources, but the Freedom Convoy was receiving leaked information from law enforcement. I just want to be clear, you never became aware of any leaked information from Ottawa police service officers, did you?
I will be 100% clear. At no time did I receive sensitive information from an active duty Ottawa police officer.
And you never received confidential information from an Ottawa police officer, did you?
No,
Okay. And Mr. Wilson never told you who these people were?
no.
And you were very involved in the security, the response and the incident command that was going on at that hotel, correct?
That's correct.
So one would expect that you would know if there was leaked confidential information, correct?
Yes, I expect I would.
Reaching fishing.
And you're not suggesting,
Anti-fishing
obviously, that
expedition.
if such a thing had occurred, that the Ottawa Police Service would condone that kind of thing, correct?
I think it's fair to say that the Ottawa Police would not condone that.
Right. And one of the things you reference in your statement at paragraph 80 is you accuse the police leadership, and I'm just going to quote you, of, quote, knowingly attempting to instigate a strong emotional reaction from convoy participants by using inflamed rhetoric and threatening the involvement of Child Protective Services.
Correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Mr. Clerk, I wonder if I could ask you please to call up HRF 401553. And if we go to page 22, please. At paragraph 103. Thank you. And I'll just read that sentence, the first sentence, sir. I also advise him, this is from your statement, correct?
That's correct.
I also advised him of my belief that our own government was committing crimes against humanity, allowing thousands of Canadians to die because they've been denied life-saving treatment, and others have been disabled or have died from
Thank
the
you so much,
vaccine,
everybody who's
something
giving
a
coffees
homicide
and stuff.
detective may
I really
want
appreciate
to
it.
consider.
I'm literally on my last leg here. I'm
And
trying to stay and make it
would
through
you
this,
agree
guys.
with me that that
I'm
would be
doing
an
rough.
example
I'll
of
be honest.
inflammatory
I'm
rhetoric
doing rough.
attempting to instigate a strong emotional response?
I'm looking at the same thing on the screen for 10
I don't
minutes at a
think it's
time.
an example of inflammatory rhetoric. I think it's absolutely factually true.
Okay.
And that I was trying to elicit a response from Detective Benson
Okay.
because he, as a homicide detective, should be investigating something of that nature.
And I won't take you to the paragraph to save time, but in paragraph 121 of your statement, you also talk about the extreme dehumanization of unvaccinated people. And I
Exactly.
guess you don't see that as inflammatory rhetoric either.
Because
correct?
that's what the government was
No, sir.
doing. It's
And,
factual.
in
Deal
your
with it.
witness
You did it.
statement,
Wear it.
you
Wear
talk
it.
about
You did it.
The police breaching windows and extracting protesters during the tactical operation, the POU operation. Do you recall that?
I do.
And you know, of course, from your experience in law enforcement, that it's easy to be an armchair quarterback and say what's wrong with the police carrying out a tactical operation after the fact, correct? It's very difficult to be on the ground and in the theater of operations, isn't it?
I would agree with that.
We
And I
don't
think
have any
to
transfer
add
anymore. We also
context
have
to the
Ethereum.
answer is that I believe in my statement, I outlined why I believed that occurred.
And you would agree with me that that in the theater of operations, police may be dealing with situations that may be volatile and more dangerous than appear
You
to
can go there.
onlookers.
You can also send
correct?
Ethereum.
That's correct.
And you're aware from the police operations that were carried out by the Ottawa Police Service, the OPP, the RCMP, and a number of other public order units. You're aware from your experience that there would generally be an arrest and detention plan prepared for those type of circumstances, correct?
Yes.
And so OPP 04 OPP 404286, if we could just briefly call that up.
You're going to have to be wrapping up pretty soon.
If I may just have one more minute.
No problem.
Thanks very much. That is, if you just be good enough to scroll down, that is the arrest and detention plan with respect to the operation that was carried out. And you wouldn't presume to say that it wasn't an appropriate arrest plan, would you?
I don't feel I'm qualified to speak to that for a major public order operation such as what occurred. My typical experience with an arrest plan was in a much smaller context, and it was very simple.
Okay. And finally, just to finish off, you testified in answer to my friend that you expected although there was an announcement of a large number of police officers and you realized that they were preparing for a tactical or a public order unit response, you testified that you thought that the police officers would do the right thing, correct?
I had hoped so.
And you thought that they would disregard the situation and simply allow the status quo to continue, correct?
Yes, I had hoped that they would see through
Thank you
the
all
false narrative
so much for your support, guys.
and stand up
So,
for us and do what was right and protect us.
Thank you very much. Those are all my questions.
Okay, next is the Ottawa Residents Coalition.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the coffees. It means a lot, really. I do mean. Yeah, he's having a bad day, but you know what? He's been pretty reasonable up until now.
Good evening,
David
Mr. Bulford. I guess we can say.
I can't
my
say
name
his
is Paul
name.
Champ, for the record, for the Ottawa Coalition Residents and Businesses.
Friday.
Mr. Bulford, I just want to ask you about the first thing you were talking about. You were concerned about being disciplined for speaking out about vaccine rules and restrictions,
Absolutely.
The federal vaccine mandate.
and you were concerned about being disciplined for speaking out about that.
Yes, I was.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear that. I think that would have been totally inappropriate.
Well, that's my lived experience with the RCMP, sir.
Yeah, I know. I've represented RCMP officers for over 20 years, including people for speaking publicly, and things have been different. I would have been happy to represent you on that. Now, I want to ask you some questions about your drive around with Sergeant Frost on the eve of the protests. So the two of you drove around looking at appropriate spots for the trucks to park. Is that right?
That's correct.
And during that drive, did the two of you discuss in any way about how long the protest might last?
I don't recall. It may have come up. And at that time, I didn't have an accurate
Okay.
timeline.
He's doing what he's doing. He's
For sure, because you
earning his
told us that you
coffees.
expected the protest would last until the federal government dropped vaccine mandates and rules. Is that right?
That was my impression, yes,
And is that what you conveyed to Sergeant Frost?
potentially.
Now, I just want to ask you, as an aside, about the crowd size. You indicated that it was the largest crowd you'd ever observed in Ottawa.
I would say that's accurate, yes.
I believe some of the records we have from police records that the size of the crowds are in the 10,000 to 15,000 range. Does that sound about right?
No, sir.
What did you think the size was?
Based on my experience doing Overwatch on Canada Day
Yep.
and seeing the large crowds, especially like, let's say Canada Day 150, where it was probably the biggest I had seen, I would have estimated the crowds in downtown Ottawa, on Parliament Hill, Wellington, that general vicinity,
Mhm.
I would have estimated close to 100,000.
So, do you think that the police were recording false information deliberately, or they just assessed it differently than you?
Ooh, I can't say. I doubt very much that they would record it false deliberately.
Could it be that you maybe just it was hard for you to assess because all the trucks took up so much space? It was tough to assess the size. of the
I
crowd.
thought about that. The trucks do take up a lot of space, but the crowd, even between the trucks, was jam-packed
It really was.
from the Supreme Court almost all the way to the Chateau Laurier. And I don't recall seeing that before. I recall seeing large crowds moving around Parliament Hill, along Wellington, into the Byward Market. But those numbers encompass a much larger geographic area than what I'm referring to.
Right.
Yeah.
When you do Overwatch, you're up on top of the buildings like Langevin Block and stuff like that, so you'd have a better eye view of
That's correct.
crowd. And you weren't able to be up on those buildings during this time, right?
No.
Okay. Now I want to ask you about the dance parties you told us about. You thought those parties were Fridays and Saturday nights,
I believe so.
but you and I don't think are so far off in age. You weren't going out to the dance parties every night, I gather, Mr. Bulford?
I didn't have time, sir.
Yeah, I understand. And so if there's dance parties on Wednesdays and Thursday nights, you wouldn't necessarily know.
I seem to recall them being restricted to weekends, but I could be mistaken.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you some questions about your interactions with law enforcement. You've already heard a lot of your evidence on that. About your interactions with PLTs, but you also had interactions with officers who were off duty. Is that right?
And another thing to mention, guys, is we get a lot more money
No,
from
like
the
you
other
mean
platforms than we do from
active officers.
the ones that you might
exactly.
be watching on.
And just to be clear, I'm not going to be
So
asking for
the-
names. I'm just
the other
trying to understand because we
platforms
heard
are
the
vastly preferred if
testimony
you
from
wanna
Mr. Wilson
lend
the
us,
other day.
a
Yes, I
hand.
understand.
We get a lot more
And
of what you give us.
I just want to
that way.
understand it. So is
Just a
Mr.
heads
Wilson
up.
getting that information from
The
others?
platforms that we advertise give us
I
a lot
can't say for
more
certain.
than the
but
other built-in
All of the
mechanisms, so to say.
officers that were supporting me in a
If that makes any
security
kind of sense.
context were either off work for their own personal reasons,
Like if you give us
Right.
a certain
or they had left
built-in support,
their
we might
service.
get a
They had
third
made
of
a
what
similar
you
decision
pay.
to me and had
Um,
decided to leave policing.
certain
How many
things
people
are
are we
equal to
talking
1
about here,
cent.
roughly?
So 1 cent per one unit of
dozen?
something.
A dozen. And so each one of those officers
Can't
would
really.
have had their own network of contacts in law enforcement. Is that
Can't
right?
really. There's I'm streaming to
Possible.
about
And
5
could have
places
been getting
right now.
information from current law enforcement.
I don't know, sir.
Certainly
But
where we accept
have to remember,
support
it
on
wasn't just-
the
Like, it was
e-transfer, the
people from all
Ethereum,
across Canada,
and
from
the Buy Me a Coffee gives
multiple-
us a much larger share
multiple
of
agents. Like
whatever
they had
people
worked
give
for
us.
multiple agencies.
So that's
It wasn't
something to
just
keep in
one
mind.
service.
I want to ask you about a different topic, Mr. Bulford. Now, the convoy organizers, Ms. Leach, Ms. Barber, others, yourself, you were
100,000
doing
people.
everything possible to convey to protesters to refrain from any kind of violence, correct?
Yes.
Yes, I would say so.
But you because you were security, you were dealing with threats at times. Is that right?
Yeah, but not threats from within the convoy protest. Most of the anything that I was receiving that was information of a public safety concern was typically someone who was committing a criminal act or potentially a criminal act against the protest.
Right.
There was one or two instances where there was some vehicles that people had reported that they were kind of presenting the idea of blocking intersections.
Right.
And those instances were reported to me by convoy protesters, which then I passed on to the police because we were trying to act within the confines of we do not want to block all of the intersections.
But Mr. Bulford, my understanding, you were concerned and were doing what you could to protect the convoy organizer leaders. Is that right? Were you coordinating with some of the other officers to ensure that Mr. Barber, Ms. Leach, and so forth were safe?
Miss Leach did end up getting a former military member
Yeah.
to provide some security for her
Yeah.
because she had received a number of death threats.
Right.
Other than that, the only people that were really receiving like a close protection detail, if you
Yeah.
want to call it that,
Yeah.
were the doctors and former Premier Peckford when he was in town.
Right.
Because especially 3 of the doctors in particular had received a number of death or a number of harassing, or they had been subject to harassment and a number of threats themselves.
Right. Now, Ms. Leach, she very successfully raised a large amount of money from GoFundMe, but we heard her testimony. She was encountering all kinds of difficulty in accessing any of that money. You knew about that at the time, correct?
Yes.
And there was many people who were very angry at her for not being able to produce that money. There was different theories and so forth that she was deliberately not giving the money to them and so forth. There was that going around, right?
There was fractures within the I would say the freedom movement, maybe not just specific to Ottawa, but
Right.
even people. I found that the people who are the biggest critics of people like Miss Leach were people who are not here presently in Ottawa.
Sure. But what I'm getting at is that, although Ms. Leach was trying to convey what she was, trying to do to get the access to GoFundMe money to help the truckers, which, we've seen all the documents, that's what she was doing. But some people at that protest who wanting access to that money, perhaps had driven a long way, they were getting very frustrated. And she was she getting threats from some of those people?
Not that I recall.
No, none.
No.
So what was the security detail for?
Well, my impression was that she was receiving threats from people that were opposed to the convoy being in Ottawa.
And everyone else who wanted access to that money, who had driven across the country, spent thousands of dollars, they were just content to sit and they weren't angry about not getting access to the money.
I don't have any information or evidence to support that, sir.
Sir, Mr. Bulford, you're a professional,
Yes.
right? You're a professional security detail protecting very important people, correct?
In my
It's
past
too
career,
much
yes.
Friday for
But
this.
Let's just be honest with each other. Someone in her situation, if you had assessed that as a professional, you would have thought she might be at risk or physical safety. The people wanting access to that money who weren't getting it were frustrated. That was a reasonable threat assessment, was it not?
It could be potential, yes, but I didn't have any intelligence or evidence to support that notion. Other than the fact that,
Now-
she was the face of the convoy. They had raised a substantial amount of money. But my experience, when you've seen Miss Leach in public, people loved her.
Now, you're aware also, Mr. Bulford, that GoFundMe, they were concerned because some of their staff were getting threats for not releasing the money. Were you aware of that?
No, sir, I was
You
not
never
aware
heard
of that.
about that?
No, sir.
That was some of the concerns GoFundMe. So that Ms. Leach and Mr. Wilson and so forth never shared that with you.
No, sir.
What about fuel providers who then decided to stop providing fuel? Did you ever hear about any of them getting threats?
From the convoy?
Yes. Well, from
Well,
anyone.
No, sir.
Companies
Honestly,
who stopped saying stopped. Yeah, right.
honestly, no. I don't recall information about fuel providers being threatened.
Now, what about tow truck drivers? We've heard a lot about tow truck drivers. Were there any threats to tow truck drivers if they tried to assist law enforcement? Had you heard anything about that?
The first time I heard of it
Thank
was
you so
from the
much,
police
guys,
witnesses
for
at this
helping out
inquiry.
with
Right.
giving the
Right.
coffees and everything. It really does make a difference. This is
what
taking such a
about,
substantial amount of time and a substantial
Mr.
amount of other
King?
things.
Mhm.
So I appreciate it all.
Did you ever view him in any way as a threat to any of the other convoy organizers?
Like a physical threat?
Yes.
No, sir.
You had never heard of him threatening or intimidating any of the other leaders?
Mr. King came to the Swiss Hotel one evening, angry, and he ended up in a verbal altercation with Chad Eros, I
Mhm.
believe.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't learn about that until the following day. I was not there when that occurred.
Mr. King had a couple of very large people with him and was intimidating Mr. Uros?
I don't know who
Full
he
of
had with him.
very large people
But-
with him.
Mr. King is a large man himself.
No doubt. Now, what about media? Now, I know obviously you're not very supportive or don't consume what you call legacy media, but you were aware and heard of that reporters for some of those organizations downtown were often being threatened while they were down trying to cover the convoy demonstrations. You were aware of that, Mr. Bulford?
I was not aware of that. I did learn
That's rude. I
that
gotta block
I
you for
believe the
that.
RCMP may have been providing security for some of those reporters. I saw one video just recently, like within the last 2 weeks, where I think Mr. McGregor, people were yelling in the background while he was trying to give a broadcast, but
Right.
that was the first I'd ever seen of that.
Or Mr. Raymond Fillion with TVA was pushed to the ground?
I was not aware of that until you just said it.
Or Mr. Evan Solomon from CTV News had a beer can thrown at his head?
I did not. I was not aware of that either.
You hadn't seen any of the other videos or just on your own walkabouts, ever seeing reporters for CBC or Global, whatnot, of crowds swarming around them and yelling at them?
No, not that I recall. I remember
Okay.
some
Okay.
mainstream reporters approaching me the night that Miss Leach was arrested when we were standing up by the stage truck, and they were trying to ask for interviews and I just declined, but I don't recall anyone being threatening towards them at all.
Okay. So we didn't see any of those things.
No, sir.
Okay. And then the legacy media, as you call it, you believe that they were misrepresenting the convoy. Is that right?
Yes, I do.
And so when you say legacy media, you're talking about CTV, CBC, Global News, Post Media, all of those?
Well, I would definitely say CBC, CTV, Global. You're accurate in that.
Okay.
Post media, I'm not so much, but also I would throw in the Toronto Star is probably the worst offender in my opinion.
Okay. And then, so was it your understanding and belief that they were all kind of working together in some way to cover the convoy in a certain way?
Well, it's been my experience, Mr. Champ, that they've been reporting very similar to each other for at least the last 2 years.
I thought your early testimony was that you weren't really watching them during the convoy. Were you watching them or you weren't watching them?
I didn't really have time to watch them that much, sir. I did review a few articles that people would send me. Like, for instance, the article detailing one of the local Ottawa residents who had been arrested early on in the convoy for carrying weapons in a public place.
Right.
And they wrote the article. I believe I saw it in the Toronto Star and CBC.
But just the whole phrase legacy media, I'm just trying to understand what that means. Legacy media, that means like old media that can't be trusted?
No, it's another name for the mainstream media,
Mainstream
right?
media.
The big outlets that have
War
that
chests.
seem to have, I don't know if you'd call it a monopoly, but they dominate the television.
Sure.
Right.
But all journalists, they all have an agenda that's counter to the people that you support. Is that what your understanding is?
I did not say all journalists do.
All journalists with legacy media.
I can't say that. I can't say that all journalists do, but I've seen many concerning remarks come from the legacy media.
Okay.
Yes.
Just last point, Mr. Bulford. I heard Mr. Mijikovsky from the Ottawa Police Service. Oh no, I apologize. Maybe it was the Commission Council asking you about racist flags that were being carried around during the protest, and I believe you were implying in your testimony that you didn't think those were real convoy protesters, that there were others who might have been infiltrating. Is that?
Yes, I suspect that's the case.
But you don't have any evidence for that.
Well, I did see a photograph
Yeah.
of a gentleman who I know to be a photographer that follows Mr. Trudeau around on a regular basis, taking a close-up shot of a gentleman carrying a Confederate flag.
It's because Confederate flags can be viewed as a racist flag. Is that right?
That's correct.
Right.
It appeared staged to me.
Right. And you didn't think that there was anyone involved in the convoy who brought Confederate flags to the protests. Is that right?
That guy in the Confederate flag. So
Not that I was aware
that guy
of.
with that
What the
Confederate
video,
flag.
I've seen
They,
the video of a masked man, like wearing a
balaclava?
balaclava,
Yes, and he was
walking
kicked
through the
out.
crowd with a
And
Confederate
then they
flag.
kicked him out.
And the video that I saw was a number of protesters telling him
Perfect.
to get out of there.
Yes,
Because he
yes,
wasn't welcome.
yes,
And they didn't
that's
want
true.
that type
That's
of.
true. That's
They
what
didn't
I was
want that
talking
type
about.
of symbol being associated to the convoy.
right.
Yes.
All the convoy people left their Confederate flags at home, like Mr. Barber.
Sir, I don't know what beliefs all of the people that came to Ottawa hold, and I don't know what they have in their possession. That would be purely speculation on my part.
All right. Thank you.
Government of Canada, please.
He wrote down a strike, a point. He's like, oh, you guys gotta keep that to yourself. I mean, I know you guys don't. Damn,
Good
it's
evening, Mr.
nastiness.
Bulford. My name is Victor Ryan, and I'm part of the council team with the Government of Canada.
Yeah,
you already
yeah.
testified to your previous history of service with the RCMP, but I'd just like to go back to it briefly. You stated you began your RCMP career with a posting with M Division in Yukon, correct?
That's correct.
And within a few years of working in the Yukon, you were selected to become a member of the emergency response team, correct?
That's correct.
And by virtue of your selection to join the ERT, you were trained as an assaulter, I believe, correct?
Initially, yes,
And then as a sniper.
that's correct.
And would you agree with me that the selection process for an emergency response team is highly competitive?
Normally, yes.
Okay, because ERTs are responsible for resolving incidents beyond the capabilities of regular police, in part due to the increased risk of violence that they can face.
Yes,
And you continue to work as part of the ERT in Yukon, as you stated in both Whitehorse and Mayo.
Thank you
before
for the coffee,
transferred to
guys.
Ottawa.
I
Is that
really
correct?
appreciate the
That's correct.
coffees.
And when you came to Ottawa, you were working
you're
with
gonna
the
have to
National
rewind like
Division
5 or 10 minutes,
Emergency
Zach.
Response Team.
yes,
Yeah, I guess so,
You
William.
were also
I guess so.
often involved in high-profile
But it
protective
is what it is.
operations for individuals such as the Prime Minister, foreign heads of state when they came to Ottawa, members of the royal family, correct?
that's correct.
And you were often deployed around the world to protect the Prime Minister and other high-profile individuals attending various international summits and conferences, correct?
2 times.
2 times.
2 times.
And you eventually rose to the rank of corporal and second in command of the surveillance and reconnaissance team within National Division ERT. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
And so you would agree that your career with the RCMP was a successful one, right? I think your evidence was earlier was that you felt like you were a dedicated professional.
Thank you so much for the
Yes.
coffees, guys. If you want to support the stream,
And so
please
while you
consider
were in Ottawa and while you were
this.
working with the emergency
you
response
can also
team,
give e-transfers at
I believe the dates were
dcmedia@gmail.com.
2013 to 2021. Is that
Really
correct?
appreciate the consideration.
Yes.
You can also send Ethereum.
You were trained by a
There's
variety
an
of
Ethereum link.
external law enforcement
Thank you so much.
agencies during that time.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say a number, but less than a handful, probably.
Okay, more than one.
Yes,
Including the
Thank you
FBI
so much,
hostage
everybody.
rescue team,
Oh my God.
that's
You're so
correct.
great.
Canadian Special Forces Operations Command,
Correct.
and the types of things that you were trained in, the various tactical aspects of policing for which you received training, including things like covert surveillance,
Yes,
explosive forced entry and breaching,
yes,
mass casualty response.
yes.
And so through this training that you received and through your
I am so
experience
tired, Cindy.
working in the National Division, you would have come to have an intimate knowledge of the parliamentary precinct in downtown Ottawa. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so you knew, for instance, how police would train for and plan for a large-scale demonstration like the convoy.
I would say that I am aware of how a typical deployment
Thank you so much.
or a mobilization would
you, sir.
look for a large scale event, but I never worked on a public order unit.
Okay, but you would have been familiar with how the ERT would have interacted with various other police forces in Ottawa during an event such as this.
Somewhat, yes.
And of course, you'd be keenly familiar with the jurisdictional, I guess, intersections in the downtown area between the RCMP, the PPS, the OPS.
Yes,
You knew how police would gather intelligence on the leadership and the key figures of any sort of protest movement that would come in.
I have some exposure to that.
And you knew what the police goals and strategies would be in policing a large-scale demonstration.
Well, I think it's fairly basic for something such as what happened in Ottawa. Well, maybe not basic is the right term, but it's no surprise to me that people would be surveilled and that they would try and learn who is a person identified as, a face of the convoy. But predominantly, most of the events that take place you mobilize resources
The point here that
for
they're
a
trying to make,
worst-case
Rain,
scenario.
is that he
The
had
vast
confidential
majority of the
training
time,
that he shouldn't have used in the protest, is
happens.
I think what the
And when you
government's
talk about
reaching for.
mobilizing resources,
I believe that's what the
one of the
government's
ways that you do so
reaching
is
at
by
here.
pulling other
Just a
police
guess?
officers from other jurisdictions. That's correct.
Yes, that's common.
And as an RCMP officer, former RCMP member, you would have been aware of the different RCMP detachments and divisions across the country, have a general understanding of where the RCMP are police of jurisdiction in other areas of the country.
Yes.
You would have been aware of the practical difficulties involved in pulling RCMP officers from provinces far flung and transferring them to Ottawa to assist the local police here in any enforcement.
Well, yes, sir. I think the RCMP has been under-resourced for pretty much my entire career, as far as back as I can remember, likely before. And I think that's almost like we've heard from other police witnesses, that's pretty much a universal in policing.
And you would have had a knowledge roughly of how many police officers would be required to manage a large-scale demonstration.
No, I don't agree with that. I don't know. My involvement with these large-scale events was very compartmentalized to my role on the emergency response team.
Okay. And that role you touted quite a bit during the occupation publicly, correct?
I wouldn't consider it touting, but I tried to explain who I was, what my experience was, so that I can try and reduce people's anxiety about the heavy police presence that they were seeing in Ottawa.
And my friend from Commission Council showed you a document that contained a quote from you from a press release where you said, "I have extensive experience in protective operations for large-scale events here in the National Capital Region. I've been involved in tactical planning for many of these large-scale events, so I'm keenly familiar with what is happening right now in regards to the police presence down around Parliament Hill and the downtown core." Does that
Nailed
sound
it.
familiar to you?
Yes,
That's exactly what he
correct.
was going for. Told you.
Also in that same press conference, you also stated, "My primary concern is individuals or groups with the potential to deliberately instigate conflict with the Freedom Convoy movement," correct?
That's correct.
And that was to you your most important concern because you knew from your past experience the potential for individuals or groups, whether associated with you or not, to use the convoy as cover for their own means, correct?
Yes, I would agree that anytime you have a large event where there's a large crowd of people, there's the primary concern from the police standpoint would be a mass casualty attack.
And by February 3rd, you had already begun to appreciate the number of different factions and elements that were converging on downtown Ottawa, correct?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
For instance, you were involved, as I take your evidence, with Mounties for Freedom. You were volunteering with Adopt a Trucker. And you were also closely associated with the Freedom Convoy, correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, my role with volunteering with Adopt a Trucker was in direct support of the Freedom Convoy.
But you were not associated with Canada Unity, correct?
No, sir.
But Canada Unity was there at the convoy.
Yes.
Yeah, and you were not associated with James Bowder, correct?
No, sir.
No, and the MOU that he brought with him.
No, like I said, the first time I read it was last week.
But he was there at the convoy, correct?
I heard that he was. The first time I ever seen him was here at this inquiry.
Mm-hmm. And you were not affiliated with the Farfadas that were at Rideau and Sussex, correct?
I also had no idea who Farfadas was or what that was until after I read about Mr. Charlin's arrest out at near Van Cleek Hill after the convoy had been dismantled.
And the individual describing herself as Queen Ramona and her supporters, you weren't associated with her or her supporters, correct?
No, sir.
No, but they were there at the convoy, correct?
Yes, I did have an interaction with some of her supporters.
And you weren't associated with any outlaw motorcycle gangs, correct?
No, absolutely not.
No, but they were there at the convoy, correct?
I believe that there was 2 men identified as potentially belonging to an outlaw motorcycle gang in the crowd early on. I don't recall ever seeing them or hearing of them again. And again, that's a bit of an assumption on my part because I don't specifically have any knowledge of that particular group.
So you heard that they were there, but you didn't actually see them.
I saw a photograph of them.
Okay. So you saw a photograph of them at the convoy, but you didn't actually encounter them.
That's correct.
You've already testified that your main role was to collect intelligence from the convoy, collect, threats of violence, assess their credibility, and forward them on to the police. But I also take your evidence that this was a peaceful protest, correct?
Yes.
And in the chronology that's set out in your witness statement, I won't take you to it unless you require it, but it's again HRF 401553. You state that on January 29th, 2022, you sent a photo to OPS and RCMP of an unidentified man in Ottawa who reportedly wore body armor and stated, "They don't realize what things will be like when the hard boys show up with a legitimate beef." Is that correct?
That's correct.
And on January 30th, the next day, you emailed PLT about a conspiracy to stage a hit and run with a tractor trailer hitting a horse that contains specific information regarding a member of the Prime Minister's protective detail, correct?
You remember that?
That's correct.
And
I remember
you relayed
that.
information to PLT regarding fights that you
I remember
either
that now.
saw or that were relayed to you, correct?
Well, there was the aggressive male up at the stage truck. I don't recall other fights beyond that.
Okay.
Other than the one instance where a male pulled a crowbar out of his car.
I believe you're referring to the individual referred to as Black Buffalo.
That's correct.
And so speaking of that, Black Buffalo became very angry at what he perceived to be an incursion into his territory, began yelling, pulled a crowbar from his truck, pushed a female actually into you.
That's correct.
As I understand it correctly. Would you agree that that's a fight?
I think it could have become one, but we were able to move people away and de-escalate the situation.
You're over your time. so
I would
the
just like to add that based on my experience in policing, especially my time as a general duty officer, I suspect that the man who presented himself as Black Buffalo was suffering from some mental health issues.
Okay, and just one last question. You also dealt at the insistence of, I believe, Keith Wilson with people at Coventry Road referring to themselves as sovereign citizens who were deputizing themselves and planning to arrest peace officers, correct?
I never dealt with those people. I received word while I was at the Swiss Hotel that was occurring. And so, and the information that I received is that someone was pretending to be me and deputizing people. And so the people at the Swiss Hotel took photographs and maybe even a video of me to have proof that I was currently at the Swiss, not falsely deputizing people at Coventry Road. And so I called one of the gentlemen who was a point of contact at Coventry Road and asked him, was this taking place? And he knew nothing about it, but he was in, I think he was in a tent or a shelter of some kind. So I asked him if he could go outside and check. He went outside and checked and confirmed that there was nothing going on there. I did later end up questioned by I think it was Ottawa Police, questioned me about that, and I relayed the same information I just said to you.
Okay, so just one last question. These examples that you and I have just discussed, in your view, are they examples of a peaceful protest?
Well, I don't believe any of those instances resulted in any real violence.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Next is counsel for former Chief Slowly.
Chief Slowly counsel's coming up? Okay, this will be interesting with Danny. This counselor's really this is one of the sharpest counselors in the commission.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Authentically, their council team is very good.
Sergeant Corporal Bulford, Tom Curry for former Chief
That's who it is,
Slowly.
Tom Curry.
Just a couple of things. Many of these questions the other questions I had have been asked by my friends.
My friends.
Could I just ask you to look at the statement that you prepared with us, please? HRF 1553, Mr. Registrar. Just when this comes up, I just want to go, please, if we could, to paragraph 19.
I wonder how long this is going to be.
When we get there, I hope we find, there it is, maybe 18, if you don't mind, just a little higher. Thank you. I think you told us that you emailed an introduction to those representatives of the OPS, RCMP, and PPS early in your tenure with the convoy, and identified who you were and what you were going to do. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
And then just scroll down, if you don't mind. Just, you see the sentence, please rest assured. All organizers of the convoy group are operating under strict instructions that every single person involved must be respectful and lawful at all times. And that was your mandate from those with whom you had been dealing.
That's correct. Yes, that was, I mean,
on the coffee I
would not
just
have
received.
been involved if I didn't think that was going to be the case.
One of the challenges is, as you've described, that this was a very difficult organization, that is the convoy in its largest sense, to have any command or control over.
Yeah, I don't think we actually, without any official authority of any kind, you know, you're not operating within a police organization or a military unit. You're trying to do the best you can as a bunch of civilian volunteers,
Right,
to make sure that people are all on board with the messaging. Yeah.
And try as you might, and others have testified to this, try as you might to have imposed a requirement for respect and for conduct that is respectful and lawful, you weren't always able to achieve that goal. Fair?
I think we did a very good job considering the size of that convoy and the crowds that protest generated.
But you weren't always able to control the conduct in the way that you might have liked. Is that fair?
Well, sir, honestly, my intention was never to try and exert control on people, because I was no longer a person of any kind of authority in Canada.
The reason I ask is because as you watched this, especially with your experience, as you watched the convoy, the events of the convoy unfold, from the earliest days when you arrived until the end when you yourself were arrested, you must have had a sense that the end was coming through this public order exercise, unless there was some other breakthrough. Is that fair?
Well, I don't think any of us expected this to go on indefinitely, but my understanding was that we were trying to take pressure off the city of Ottawa and Chief Slowly,
Right.
you know, with the negotiated deal that I learned about after the fact. And I was 100% on board with whatever negotiations that the truck captains could accomplish and legal team could accomplish with the police to prevent a massive takedown of the convoy occurring. I was in support of that.
Right. Because in the absence of some effort by the convoy, successful effort by the convoy organizers to be able to eliminate the consequences for the residents and the city of Ottawa, the businesses and the like, you understood that it was going to come to an end via a police enforcement action.
I knew that that was a possibility. I didn't, like I said before, I had hoped that it wouldn't come to that.
Right.
And that, honestly, sir, I was hoping that the police would stand up with us, which would then basically be a symbolic gesture for the federal government that what they were doing was no longer lawful in Canada, and they weren't going to have the police as their enforcement arm to
Right.
do anything that was unconstitutional and unlawful and not backed on evidence.
Which would require police services, not just Ottawa, but OPP, RCMP, PPS, all of the other services who had come to help to disclaim their duty to uphold the law. You were asking quite a lot.
Yeah, I was, but it happened in Ontario earlier in the declared pandemic
Right.
when Premier Ford tried to exert more power and the police said no.
Can I ask a couple of other things then, just in the time remaining? You told the commissioner that you, upon arrival and getting this underway, you imposed a form of ICS model or incident command structure to the best that you could.
Yeah, I mean, it was a joint effort, but I mean, myself and a number of others were familiar with that system.
Right.
And so it was brought to our attention. Maybe we should set something like this up because that initial few days was absolute chaos.
And to whom then did you bring, if you were you at the top, were you the designated incident commander?
No, sir, I was not.
Who was?
Well, Mr. Guerra was in charge of Adopt a Trucker. And then the overall, if you want to call it incident commander, volunteer was a former Ottawa paramedic.
Got it. And then Mr. Guerra, would he have taken direction, strategic direction from the board of the Convoy Corporation once it was incorporated? Or were you aware?
I would say that's accurate because our whole purpose of being there was to support the truckers. I mean, the whole initial mission was to provide food and shelter and transportation services to protesters.
Was part of your effort in within that group, the incident command group, to keep track of the number of police personnel who were on the scene?
No, sir.
Okay.
No, that was not something that we were interested in. I mean, the police were going to do what they were going to do, and we were trusting them to do their job.
Then just finally, a couple of things, if I may, if I could, Mr. Registrar, I'm sorry to drag that document back up, 1553. Thanks so much. And if you could go to paragraph 99, just want to get your help with one thing, please. These go to the events of February the 15th. And you had a visit at the Swiss Hotel described here, in which OPP and OPS liaison officers attended to meet with volunteer coordinators and Ms. Leach. You were one of the volunteer coordinators?
Yeah, I was the volunteer security coordinator.
And who were the other volunteer coordinators, if you recall, with whom that meeting or who attended that meeting?
Well, it was myself, Tamara Leach, and the former Ottawa paramedic.
Okay, got it. So 3 of you and 3 police personnel.
To the best of my recollection, yes.
And it was at that meeting that you've written that they attended to discuss the recent document provided by police to convoy participants. And that's the document that laid out that the Emergencies Act having been declared, it was now required that people vacate the protest. Is that fair?
Well, it's more nuanced than that, because when I reviewed that document, I know which one you're talking about. It had the red border outside of it. I read through the criteria, and I don't think any of us in that room with those liaison officers met the criteria laid out in that document from the OPS of people that were no longer permitted into the downtown.
Right. And what you engaged with, I won't read all of it, but you spoke to those officers to express your concern that the use of force by police against the peaceful protests without negotiation was wrong, and they ought not to do that.
Yes,
Fair?
I did.
And scroll down, if you don't mind, please, just to paragraph 102. Now that we're on the 17th, and you had an encounter with another officer, or Detective Benson, who replied to your query about whether you were people were on the lookout for you.
No, Mr. Benson contacted me by text message after Tamara Leach had been arrested.
Okay, thank you. And you had an exchange with him. I'm just interested in the second last sentence. He responded by saying that the occupation was beyond a protest and the trucks had to go. And you replied to him that it was not an occupation.
Well, my belief that a definition of an occupation is usually like a foreign military has taken control of another country.
Right. Do you now accept, thinking back about it, that from the perspective of the residents of the city of Ottawa, the Ottawa Police Service, that the protest, embedded as it was the equivalent of an occupation?
No, I don't agree with that.
Okay. Now, final thing, my friends asked you about whether you had information from active serving officers or service personnel of the Ottawa Police Service or any other police service. You tell the commissioner if you know, in respect to the information that Mr. Wilson had, am I right that so far as you know, the information Mr. Wilson had was the same as the information you had, that is only from retired, that is non-active police personnel?
I can't say that for certain because Mr. Wilson spent the majority of the time, Mr. Wilson was at the Arc Hotel, and the majority of the time I was at the Swiss Hotel.
All right. Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you. Next, if I could call on the Ontario Provincial Police.
Questions for this witness? Or are they going to have questions? I'm working on a summary videos with all the coffees you guys got me.
Commissioner, I have no questions.
I knew that.
Okay, thank you. For the Democracy Fund.
I'm falling asleep still. I need more coffee.
And, Citizens for Freedom.
Commissioner Rob Kittredge for Justice Center. We have no questions for this witness, and to the extent it may be necessary, we'll cede our time to Mr. Miller.
Ooh! All right.
Organizers.
Miller time in the chat. Miller time in the chat. Miller time in the chat, please. We got a seating of time. Let's get a Miller time. Everybody, let's do the Miller time. We're going to hold up. Here it goes. Boom. Boom. Do the wave. Woo.
For the record, Brendan Miller, Mr. Bulford, I'm counsel to the Freedom Corp, who is the entity representing the protesters that were in this city in February and January of 2022. Good evening. Commissioner, just for ease of reference, what I'm continuing to do now, just to get to the point, your counsel have been excellent in adducing evidence in chief, and I'm just going to deal with examination from the questions that arose from the other parties. And so I'll try and be quicker now for you. So
You won't hear many complaints, I think, from the hall on that, but
thank you very much.
it's, of course, you're entitled to your
Yes,
time.
I just think it's helpful. So there's a couple things, and there will be a couple documents that arose that are in the system already from my friend's questioning I want to put to you. But the first thing I'd like to ask you about, Mr. Bulford, is Parliament Protection Services. This is, of course, to most Canadians, a sort of police service that nobody understands and nobody knows much about. What can you tell me about it?
Well, after the October 22nd, 2014 shooting at the War Memorial and Mr. Bibeau storming the center block, there was a big review afterwards that took place because there was 3 different agencies that were responsible for security on Parliament Hill. And they were all amalgamated into the Parliamentary Protective Service so that they would have one cohesive unit for the precinct.
Right. And can you tell me, who does the Parliament Protection Services, who does it answer to?
Well, when I was working, I still believe they fell under the RCMP's command, but that may not be the case anymore. They may be completely independent now.
Right. And the RCMP command, then that falls under Commissioner Lucky.
That's correct.
And is it fair to say that from what you've seen from being within the RCMP and seeing on the news, that you've witnessed or heard of Commissioner Lucky relaying public messages on behalf of the elected executive branch, or relaying information that the political executive branch wants to
Thanks,
relay
Patty.
to the
It's really
public?
appreciated.
Yes.
Okay. So
I'll take a break. I'll try.
the next question I want to bring up, if I can bring up document 7722 _rel.
Coffee time.
0001.
Let's go. Come on. You got it, Danny. He's going to take it home. Take us home into the
Council, are
weekend.
you referring to text messages?
The text messages, yes. So
Text
it's gonna-
messages,
and I'll
yes.
have to get the other one too. So it's 7724 is the next one, just so you know.
I'm not even able to live tweet anymore. To tweet anything. I can't deduce any.
Now, I'm not sure if you were present or you had watched this part of the hearing when I referred to these text messages. This is a text exchange between one of the staffers with the Prime Minister's office and another one of the staffers with the Minister of Public Safety's office, okay? And this is, in this context, the staffer with the Prime Minister's office states to the staffer with the Public Safety Minister's office that got a quick response, people are into it. Let me know if your boss is too, boss being the Minister of Public Safety. Happy to help however I can. This is what I sent through, by the way. Hi, I just had a chat with Alex at PS, being Public Safety, who had a bit of an interesting idea. As you saw in the pod goals chat, the trucker convoy and some of their more extreme comments calling for January 6th style insurrection are getting more coverage in the media. Alex was surveying whether there would be some interest in his boss doing some media on this eventually. He was chatting with Mendicino about it right before he went into a cabinet retreat. And can you agree the cabinet retreat was on January 24th? Were you aware of that?
That sounds accurate.
Yeah, of 2002. And there he goes on. I think there could be an opportunity to get in on this growing narrative of the truckers, particularly with the research that LRB is doing into their backers. Do you know who the LRB is?
No.
Have you ever heard of the Liberal Research Bureau while you were on the Hill?
The hell, the
No.
Liberal Research Bureau? Sounds like some dystopian
And my
bullshit.
thoughts of framing here would be
The
similar
Liberal
to
Research
what
Bureau.
PM/Blair,
What is it,
being Minister during
anti-hate.ca
Prime
or
Minister,
whatever?
said last year when January 6th occurred. And the first point is our democracy is something we need to nurture and protect every day. And then if we could bring up the second part of the text
I'm
message
on
at
Truth Social,
7724.
by the way. Same name on any platform that you're on. Search for my username, Patriot Smoothie, all one name. And if I'm there, you might find me. So that's just a
And then it goes
FYI.
on, and this is the points that are being relayed or that is essentially going to be the narrative. We will always support the right to peaceful protest, and some of the calls that organizers of these events are making are concerning and will take them seriously, would need something to back this up. We'll continue to monitor the situation closely. The fine line to walk would be to ensure we are not looking like we're directing the police, which obviously is not the goal here. Hoping to canvass your thoughts, Alex said he'd come back to me with a proposal this afternoon when he gets to chat with Mendicino.
We've
again.
seen that all day,
Obviously,
Joyce.
pending his bosses and our interest
Seen some good videos
in
today.
looking into this further. So that text is to either the Prime Minister or someone within his office.
Oh, yeah. They're coming
And
down and they're
explaining what
angry
Alex,
and ready to beat on
the,
people.
Chief of Staff for the Public Safety Minister has come up with. And he responds, thanks. I had an initial chat with my boss and he's supportive, but wants to wait a day or two. There's a danger that if we come down too hard, they might push out the crazies, being, I think, the far extreme fractions online they were talking about. I think that's fair. She responds, apparently, Global and others are working on stories. Maybe we see how those land. So you had mentioned that you don't trust legacy media, and you mentioned Global News, and that's one of them.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. Now, I've sent this around. I'm not going to try and move this article into evidence at this juncture. But did you know that the following day, Global released a news article titled January 6th event, or that there was going to be a potential January type 6th event on during the Ottawa convoy. And they managed to get Parliament Protection Services to comment. And what was reiterated was one of the points in that text message. So again, I'm asking you, if the government was going to try and relay a narrative, from your experience from working on the Hill in law enforcement, would they use something like the Parliamentary Protection Services to relay a narrative?
I can't say for certain. All of my experience with the Parliamentary Protective Service is I've never seen anything political from them because they're limited in scope.
Okay. And so the Parliamentary Protective Services reiterate, and I'll just read it in. I'm just trying to pull it up again.
Not sure you got much from the witness about the parliamentary.
Right. So in any event, I'll deal with that.
There are going to be lots of witnesses that will
Understood.
come later.
Understood. So
You can use your time, but
yeah. So moving on, essentially the Parliamentary Protective Services in this article states that they're wary of the security and they won't talk about further matters in order to keep people safe. I'm just summarizing it. We'll put it into evidence through other witnesses. But is it concerning to you that, you know, coming from this issue with misinformation that you're concerned about and you've testified to, that the elected executive branch has identified knowing about news articles and what they're going to be about before they come out? And then
what's the evidence of that?
directly in the text messages, they said that Global's running a piece on it. It was on January 24th, of which that was, and the news article I'm speaking of was on January 25th. And then Parliamentary Security Services.
Parliamentary Protective
says
Service.
Essentially the byline that is in those text messages, sir. And I'll put that into evidence, and I'm just asking if it concerns him, if that's the case. That's
I'm
it.
just trying to understand where the evidence is for that.
Yes, it's the text messages. So you have the text messages between the staffers with both the Prime Minister's office
And
as
Meninginos.
well as with the Minister of Public Safety.
Yeah.
They then say what the narrative is going to be. They then say that Global is going to be running this story. And then when Global runs the story, they quote Parliamentary Protective Services, citing basically one of the lines in the text messages, sir.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not sure I understand the link at all in the way you describe it, but the record is clear, so we'll
Yes.
leave it.
So with respect to that, if that is the case, is that something that concerns you?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And moving on from that point, my friend brought up with you.
My friend.
The
They all say
issue
that,
with
eh?
respect to
My
danger
friend.
of
My
people
friend!
spamming the advice you were giving and everything. And
You got
I'd
to use
like to bring up
parliamentary language
OPS
or, you know,
document,
decorum. But
145.
so they just found a way to insult each other by the way that they say my friend. Sometimes it's my friend, my friend, my friend, my friend. You could tell, you know, what the emotion is.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
It's the document that the OPP and 2 OPS liaisons brought to the Swiss Hotel.
Right. And in reviewing that document, does any of it therein say that all the protesters have to leave?
No,
All right. And so was that one of the documents that formed your understanding of what was to happen?
I thought it was just reinforcing Justice McLean's decision that as long as we abided by those 3 conditions of no one coming to Ottawa to commit violence, do not block critical infrastructure, and do not disrupt trade, we were still considered a lawful
My
protest.
little friend. Oh, no. I meant that one.
And the people that they were delivering that message to, such as myself and the others, didn't fit into any of those categories that I'm reading here.
Right. And with respect to the position therein that says they need to move their trucks, you're not contesting that that was going to have to happen?
No.
Okay. And so when you talk about lawful protest, you're talking about people, actually physical people, human beings on a street protesting. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Okay. And so it was your belief and you were advising Canadians to come to Ottawa or to stay in Ottawa in order to carry out that sort of protest.
I hate to, it's David Michikowski. I hate to spend more time on Friday evening of everyone, but we really are getting into cross-examination.
That's fine. I'll move on.
More of leading questions, Paul Champ on the record.
Thanks.
Pretty leading.
So if we could
Pretty
please
leading.
bring up OPP document 4286.
I can't even step away for a minute because there's so much happening. So many people are trying to fight each other.
Okay, so this is the document
Well, they're not fighting.
that my
geez.
friend put to you. It's the operational plan. And if Mr. Clark wouldn't mind scrolling down to page 31. It's not 31 in the documents. Oh, no, it is. There we go. Perfect. So if you can just take a moment to look at that, Mr. Bulford. It's a script for arresting for arresting protesters.
Okay.
All right, so you can agree the plan is that the protesters were essentially going to be released with just a court date and some release conditions as soon as possible. They weren't being put before a justice of the peace or a bail hearing. That was the plan?
Yes.
All right. And so other than Tamara Leach and Chris Barber, do you know of anyone else this plan just wasn't applied to, where they just got a promise to appear with conditions, undertakings, and they didn't get massive bail conditions imposed upon them by the Crown or on behalf of OPS? Do you know anyone else other than those two individuals who wasn't released under this sort of release plan?
Well, I know of at least Pat King.
Yeah.
And his friend, I believe his name is Tyson Billings.
Yeah.
George.
Were both incarcerated for an
George.
extended period of time.
Was anybody else that you know of?
I've heard of other people that were charged, but I don't know the particulars of their release.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Okay, any re-examination?
No, thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, so thank you. You're free to go.
Thank you, sir.
So we've completed the list for today, and we will come back on Monday morning at 9:30.
I thought he was going to say Saturday. I thought I heard him say Saturday.
The commission is adjourned. La commission est adjournée.
The commissioner de Dajonay. Okay. I'm sorry, I can't speak. I didn't mean to be insulting or rude or anything. My brain is fried. I'm tired. I'm not trying to make fun of people who speak French. Okay, I come from a francophone family. My parents, one of my parents are francophone. I don't speak any French though. Francophone by birth, but speaks good English. So I mean, proper. Still a lot of the French, ways of approaching language into the English. Not so much an accent because they're born and raised in Ottawa area. Franco-Ontarian, I guess, is the correct way of saying it. But nonetheless, francophone, because it just means like your primary language being French. I think it's the first language, your mother tongue, the first language you learn. You know what? I can't even. Or a person who speaks French. Okay, well, all right. Well, that applies. Perfect. Who's up on Monday, Joy? We don't have any more protesters. We're up. So the Monday schedule, I will tell you real quick. By the way, if you enjoyed today and you want to help me out, I would really appreciate it because this is taking a tremendous amount of investment in time and energy. And you can see I'm barely holding myself together in here with glue and hope and a prayer. And thank you to everyone who did send coffees. You can send an e-transfer if you'd like to daceymedia@gmail.com. That is DACEY media@gmail.com. If you appreciated this week's summaries, this week's coverage, all the summaries, everything else, or if you want to do something, you could also do anonymous donations as well to buymeacoffee.com/Patriot Smoothie. you could go on there and send some coffees. Thank you to everyone who has supported. So for Monday, let's see who we're gonna just do. Got to go into look at find ourselves on the list here. We're on witness. We're on witness 35 on Monday, who is Drew Dilkers from the city of Windsor. We're also expecting to see Jason Crowley from the Windsor Police Service, Dana Earley from the Ontario Provincial Police. Dana, isn't that the lawyer? Isn't that the OPP's lawyer, or is it someone with a similar name? I thought the OPP's counselor is named Dana as well. And then Paul Lischid, Marco Van Hugen, and then Coots in Ontario. So it looks like starting either the end of next week or early the week after next week, we're going to get into public safety, CSIS. I believe CSIS's testimony will be in camera. So basically meaning no parties will be present except for the commission, I believe, and maybe the government of Canada. And that'll be it. And then the commissioner will decide after the testimony how much, if any of it, to make public. That's my understanding. So CSIS basically did do an application like Jeremy McKenzie did for a publication ban. They actually didn't want a publication ban. They wanted the camera to be. They wanted the meeting to be in camera, meaning like it's off. It's not public at all. And the Commissioner Rollo did grant them that quite a bit ago. And then we're going to get into people like Mary Helen Shea. I can't even begin to the Integrated Terrorism Assessment Center, the RCMP Deputy Commissioner Michael Duham and Brenda Lucky, respectively. I'm sorry, I cannot say any of this. And then another Deputy Commissioner of the RCMP, Curtis Zablocki. Okay, I can't even begin to say these names. Oh, man. John Oski, former Canadian CBSA. Then we're going to hear from Transport Canada, Department of Finance, quite a few of those, 2 Global Affairs, and 4 people from the Privy Council, Minister of National Defense, Minister of Public Safety, Minister of Public Preparedness, and President of the Privy Council, Bill Blair. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will go next. Omar Algebra will follow, followed by David Lametti, the Minister of Justice, then Dominic LeBlanc, the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, and finally Chrystia Freeland, Deputy Prime Minister, will be the last anticipated witness of the commission. We are at 34 witnesses out of, so we have finished the testimony of 34 witnesses, and we anticipate 71 witnesses. So we are almost halfway there. Whoa, we're almost halfway there. Whoa, don't you dare. Almost time to go home. There's no sign. What about Doug Ford? Yeah, Doug Ford's currently in court right now fighting his summons. He's been summoned to this thing because they asked him first and then he said no. And obviously that would include his Solicitor General, former Solicitor General, Sylvia Jones. So obviously they said no. And so then the commission summoned them, which is illegal, like you have to come now kind of thing. And then now they're in court fighting that summons. And it doesn't seem like, if I'm a betting man, I'm saying that the judge is going to say Doug has to go to the commission. And the judge, I believe in that case, the judge said that we'll know between the 8th and the 10th of November. So by between Tuesday and Thursday of next week, we'll know the judge's decision. The court he will issue his decision on between those dates, I assume. And I'm hoping that Doug does make an appearance. I certainly want to hear from him. And I hope everyone has a fantastic Friday, guys. I am going to go take a rest. And thank you everyone who sent the e-transfers and the coffees. Again, that's dacmedia@gmail.com for a quick e-transfer, or you can go buymeacoffee.com/patriotsmoothie. And if you look in the description of this video, you will see an Ethereum address for those people who are into that kind of thing. The Pierre Poilievre supporters, as they would call them. And we're going to have those summary videos out. I'm going to have a summary video out hopefully over the next hour or two. That's for day 16 yesterday. And then I'm going to have the summary video for today sometime over the weekend. Take care. Have a good one.